continue with our ongoing coverage, around violence against children in this country. Government often being accused of not doing enough to solve this problem, and that the civil society organizations say that child abuse is now at pandemic levels. Let's get a sense of government's response to the crisis. Take you back to my co-anchor, Michelle Craig, live to us from the Teddy Bear Clinic today. And of course, as we try to think through the different solutions, Michelle, something ought to be said around the role that government can play in making sure that those solutions do materialize.
Certainly, and I actually just want to go into my conversation with the Department of Social Development. Cynthia Nyoni joins us here this morning. She is the Deputy Director of Child Abuse and Neglect. Cynthia, good morning. Thank you very much indeed for meeting us here at the clinic for this discussion this morning. You know, where to begin insofar as the scourge of violence against children in our country. Shall we start with the issue of being reactionary? Because right now it feels like this is how we are dealing with this crisis. Police have admitted to as much to us this morning on the program that violence in the home in particular is different. They are reacting. When do we get to the stage of being proactive here?
Yes, good morning, and good morning to the viewers at home, and thank you for having me this morning. I think the question that you are asking is very important, because the high levels of violence, child abuse, neglect and exploitation that we see, affecting our children is really at a rate where we really are struggling to manage it. It is also not right that we would always be reactive, because, as the Department of Social Development, we developed policies, legislation that are really trying to bring up the paradigm shift in terms of how do we bring interventions when we're dealing with violence, child abuse, neglect and exploitation. And the more emphasis, especially coming from the Children's Act 38 of 2005, we're saying that as government or as stakeholders, we really need now to turn the tables around so that we keep the scourge. Because we've been reactive for a long time, and now it's getting out of hand. It's overwhelming, actually, what we are faced with. So I think the most appropriate thing to do right now would be to be, preventative in our measures or in our interventions. Invest more in prevention programs. Your awareness, education, and information for the communities out there, because we have also realized that as government or as civil society or as other stakeholders within the child protection system, it is really not in our hands anymore. But we really need to bring, a lot of stakeholders, including your community members. I mean, we've seen that traditional leaders are now becoming, the great deal part of our stakeholders that we can utilize. Your religious leaders, they play a very critical role within our communities, because most of these families, they go to churches, they rely on their leaders within their communities, and those people have got more power and say in how we can handle this high levels or prevalences of violence.
In a country like ours, Cynthia, the levels of violence against children and the crime statistics bear that out, right? They are at the levels of a country that is at war.
Yes.
And yet we are not. But we are at war in the sense of our unemployment rates, our levels of poverty and inequality. We are the most unequal society in the world. How do those socio-economic factors feed into what's happening to our children?
They feed or they play a major role, because as you can imagine, a lot of families are going through strain. A lot of families are unemployed, parents are unemployed. Children sometimes have to fend for themselves, for families to function. And that is really not how, the ideal family should be operating or living their lives. A lot of people are unemployed. There's a high rate of crime. There is high rate of violence. And I don't think families are really coping especially with what has happened during COVID-19. We've seen a lot of people or families or even breadwinners losing their jobs. That on its own brings strains to family functioning. And we have seen that a lot of children now, you can see there's a lot of children begging on the streets. Children sometimes miss school because they don't have enough food in their household. That on its own is a burden to children. And the way or the manner in which families are supposed to function has lost its meaning because of all these challenges that we are alluding to. And that brings, some form of reactive reactions from parents to say that we are not coping, and they resort to violence, or they resort to child abuse, or they resort to neglect, for that matter, because we've seen through our National Child Protection Register that the stats for neglect are also, escalating. Children are being neglected or unsupervised, or they go, for days without food because parents have gone from their homes to fend for their children. So children are left vulnerable. Perpetrators are having a feast or are having a field of play where they know exactly who to prey on, taking advantage of these things that are happening in households. And that brings us to really having high levels of violence, child abuse, neglect and exploitation. Children are also left alone. Nowadays we're using a lot of technology. We've seen that through COVID-19 where children have learned to use, our technology. And that on its own is a vulnerability because children are exposed to online predators which, lure them, promising them money, promising this and that, which is also another vulnerability.
Cynthia, how do we stop having conversations like this one, year in, year out, and yet we continue to see the kinds of violence perpetrated on our children every single day worsening? Do you feel like we are at a crossroads, that something, because our current approach, whatever the approach is from government, the police, other stakeholders, it's not working.
Yeah. We can never stop to converse or to have discussions like this. I think the most critical thing to do now is to strengthen our intersectoral collaboration, but also identify gaps within the system. Yeah. The child protection system is not just one man's show or one department working in silos. We need to really strengthen our intersectoral collaboration, working with the key departments, civil society organizations, communities themselves. You know that communities also have power to change their situation only if we bring them on board. Children themselves have got a say in conversations like this, because even with the second presidential summit that we had on the gender-based violence and femicide, children, raised issues to say the policies that we are currently having are not child-friendly. We need to also bring them on board to have their say in terms of how would they like to see the South Africa that everybody wants to live in, because that is very important. So we really need to bring more stakeholders on board, but also look at what are the gaps in improving how the approaches that we use can be different in the current situations that we are facing now, because the situation we had 10 years, 20 years ago is not the same with what we are faced with. And the challenges are also, substance abuse is also at the rise because of the challenges that we are discussing. So we really need to see how we bring on board families. Every child comes from a family, but in the manner in which we used to live 20 years ago is not the same as now. So the discussion really has to go on, but we need to bring more stakeholders on board, but strengthen our intersectoral collaboration. More so, work preventatively in terms of our awareness raising, education and information, because people lack information, hence they don't know how to utilize or ask for help or where to go. And most of the time you find that the system has failed a lot of people because of different challenges that we are faced with. The child protection system needs to be strengthened, but we need to work together. Bring on board your religious sector, your traditional leaders. Everybody needs to be on board, because with the Children's Act, it is very clear to say that Section 110, we need everyone to be able to report, incidences of child abuse, neglect, and exploitation.
Yeah, Cynthia, thank you for joining us here this morning at the Teddy Bear Clinic. Cynthia Nyoni is the Deputy Director for Child Abuse and Neglect at the Department of Social Development. And, various issues coming out of all of the discussions we've had here this morning. The fact that something needs to change insofar as how we attack the scourge of violence against children. Something needs to be done differently. These various departments can't be working in silos. We can't just be reactionary this morning. It's the start of the kinds of discussions we need to see with other departments as well, Ayanda, as we focus this morning on extreme levels of violence against children that we're experiencing here in South Africa.